Hey friend, I'm Sarah Magdalena and you're listening to the Daydreaming Wolves podcast, in which I talk about things I love like radical self-healing, feminism, relationships, activism, plant friends and magic. Sometimes it's just me sharing my thoughts, and sometimes I invite beautiful guest speakers for exciting interviews. You can subscribe on iTunes and check out my website daydreamingwolves.com, as well as sarahmagdalenalove.com for all things web design and online marketing. Welcome everyone. I am so excited to have Melanie on my podcast today. I came across Melanie's work about 1.5 years ago, I think, when I did a course on ancestral healing, which was really, I think it was for me a gateway into herbalism really, because we did look at herbalism from such a different perspective, and we really kind of went deep into, what does it mean to have a connection with the plant? What does it mean for things like ancestral trauma? And these things just got the geekiness in me so excited that I just had to learn more. And interestingly, shortly after that, I enrolled in the Herbal Academy, and things have just kind of exploded for me since. And it's just so beautiful. I really loved her approach, and I then subscribed to her newsletter, and I've really enjoyed, receiving these background stories, some of which have been so touching. I've just reread a couple that you had written in the last couple of months, and I had to cry about some of them. And I think you just have such a beautiful way of sharing human experiences that we can all relate to on some level, even if we haven't experienced exactly the same. And so I just feel that the way you work with plants is really magical and beautiful, and I'm so honored to have you here. So that's my little emotional intro, Melanie, and I would love to invite you to say a few things about, who you are, where you are in the world right now, and what you see as your mission, and, what do you care most about in your work?
Oh, Sarah, I love the emotional connection introduction. It's so wonderful and makes me feel so at home. Because I think, so the secret kind of at the heart of my work, my herbal practice is called Psyche and Soma. Mm-hmm. And I see that the ampersand, and that, that uniting and connecting of all of the parts of ourselves as central to my work. But the real secret at the heart of it is that I understand it as my duty to love the clients that come to me, the plants and creatures that come across my path, the parts of myself that I would prefer to reject and cast away. And so I think, even though there is a very strongly technical side to my practice, I work primarily in the Chinese herbal tradition, which is very brainy and a lot of pattern recognition and a lot of cross-referencing, and I work with a lot of people with complex cases who are taking lots of medications and thinking about all of these kinds of things. As important as the rational mind is, and as important as knowledge and tradition, all this kind of stuff, I think the most important thing is love and presence. And so it's so nice to start with that. It's just so nice to start with that.
Yes, that's so true. And rereading your About page also, I really have such deep appreciation for your openness to combine traditional approaches, our conventional medicine, with herbalism, because one of the things I really care about is breaking down the stigma and shame we often feel around things like chronic illness or mental health. And I think it's sadly, I see sometimes in people who have really struggled with the medical system, a kind of hesitation to approach alternative approaches, because sometimes, not always, but sometimes there is this idea that it can only be one or the other, and conventional medicine isn't to be trusted, when actually there's just so much value in both these things, and they just provide such different nurturing aspects. So can you maybe speak to that a little bit more?
Oh, yes, yes. Well, so I would have died. I would never have been born and then have died multiple times if it weren't for conventional medicine.
Yeah.
And so there's part of it, I think, is having been someone with chronic illnesses who, even if I had, I think, the full range of complementary medicine available to me from a young age, I have no doubt that it would have made a big difference. Also, if I hadn't been, eating the, 80s child diet of like Ritz crackers and canned green beans and cheese in a can and whatever crazy things we were all eating, fruit snacks. I have no doubt that that would have made a difference. And I also believe that, I wouldn't have been able to make it without conventional medicine. And, my mother is a registered nurse and a very, very smart and excellent one. I was in a very long-term relationship with a physician for many years and really watched him go through the training with quite a lot of passion and compassion and an open heart and a sincere desire to help people, just as sincere, if not more so, than a lot of what I see in the complementary medicine world. And so I think it's just clear to me that as humans, we face some big challenges, individually and collectively. And so we need all the tools. And so how silly to say, here's an entire realm of tools that I'm going to throw away or discount. And I think that's true for people who have preconceived notions about complementary medicine, as well as sort of the my crunchy natural people who are afraid of physicians. And I do understand sometimes that, there can be a trauma-based component to this because people have been really let down and hurt by conventional medicine. And I've experienced that too. And so there are some skills that we need to cultivate in order to know how to advocate for ourselves within that system, how to hold a provider at a little bit of arm's length until we've vetted them and feel like, okay, yes, like I'm going to bring you onto my team. But I think it's very important. I think it's very important to weave the web with all of those different pieces.
Yeah, totally. I also really loved something that you wrote about pain or challenges or difficult health situations as an initiation, and it's something that I still find it a bit hard to put into words, so I'm just going to kind of make a start, but I'm sure you're going to have so many more beautiful words on that one. I just feel like there's different tendencies. So one tendency that I sometimes feel a bit funny about is that when we're pushing the idea too far, that we're creating our experiences and that we're attracting certain things because we're not optimistic enough or because we're not open to forgiveness enough. And I think that can be so painful for someone who has experienced real injustice. At the same time, I think if we reject that completely, there's kind of a disconnection from the fact that the mind-body connection is so undervalued in so many really dominant approaches right now. And I think that is really deep healing and forgiveness. We just can't force it, and we have to as a first step, and that's what I often see missing. And what I have seen you speak so beautifully about is that step of acknowledging the injustice and the pain and the real challenge in the human experience to then go, but I also have choices and I really want to celebrate those. Can you say a little bit more about what you see as your initiations maybe?
Yes, well, the first thing is that I think that we have to, I feel compelled to speak out very strongly against this trend that has been going on for quite some time. It really sort of peaked in the United States, maybe in the early aughts, around The Secret and, Oprah, like The Secret, this, and it is a kind of spiritual materialism, by which I mean the idea that your state of spiritual progress will be reflected in your material wealth and physical beauty, according to a very narrow standard of that, and it is an absolute perversion of any kind of genuine spiritual tradition. And by perversion, I mean twisting, a misshapenness. So at the heart, underneath that twisting or misshapenness, of course, as you're saying, there's a tremendous value in the practice of forgiveness and in taking responsibility for that which we can take responsibility for, sometimes which will be limited to our thoughts and responses to really difficult things. And we also can remember that there are circumstances and people who cannot take responsibility for their thoughts. That's not a guarantee either. So there is something genuine there. However, this belief that it's going to work like this one-to-one is totally wrong. So my personal, for me, the initiation is like ongoing. I keep thinking that it's going to be done, but then there's more. And probably we have to always remember that, because if we walked around knowing oh, good, you graduated from grade 3. Now soon will be grade 6 and it will be harder. It would be too hard. But my first experience of initiation through physical illness was when I was in high school. I had a bleeding disorder called ITP, idiopathic thrombocytopenia purpura, and basically it's an autoimmune illness where your body, your immune system starts attacking your platelet cells, which help your blood to clot. And it's a very strange experience because generally people don't feel at all unwell. You feel totally normal. But someone touches your arm and then a bruise appears as if you had been, beaten. And the real danger of it is that at a certain, if your counts get low enough, you can have a spontaneous brain hemorrhage and just die for no reason. But meanwhile, I was feeling totally fine.
Yeah, but that's so scary. Wow.
Yeah, yes. So talk about mind-body disconnect, So I was for many months getting these, intravenous gamma globulin infusions and treatment. This is Western medicine saving my life in an ongoing way for quite some time. And I went. It was summertime. It was like July or something, and I went to this camp, this Catholic social justice camp. I was raised Catholic, and I think at that point I was really questioning my faith, and I was really iffy. There was a cool girl from my church who was going to I kind of wanted to go, but I wasn't sure. And then it sort of seemed it's going to be a real pain in the butt, we're going to be doing all this volunteering. It's going to be hard, and I don't know if I want to go. And so for whatever reason, I did follow through and I go on this trip. And once I got there, I had, and it was always the question of am I going to have to leave and get a treatment and all this kind of thing. And a part of being there was being connected with people who were struggling with things that were so far beyond anything that I had to struggle with, as a person growing up, white and in the middle class in the U.S. and with access to education and all these kinds of things. And then another part of it was that there was a real deep spirituality that was present that I often couldn't find in church, at that time in my life. And I had the experience one night of journaling. And deeply, I can't even really put it into words. The best I can say is that I deeply accepted what was happening to me. And without drama, without it being an excuse to be special and like without feeling like I'm being put upon and like and I started to cry and I felt this deep release. And the way that it works with this illness, it's not like I can say, oh, in that moment my pain was gone or it was over. But what I can say is that after that, my counts improved and I never needed another gamma globulin infusion.
Wow. That's amazing.
So, yeah, it is and was. And so then fast forward to, so that was grade 3. Fast forward, I'm now in grade 6, some years later with a big flare-up of another autoimmune condition, getting sicker and sicker. And so, of course, I have the thought, oh, I know what to do now. I just have to accept this deeply and spiritually. Like, I'm going to just run this program like that I did before, and then I'm going to be healed. Like it was a transaction, like I could order it off the menu, like a hamburger or something. And of course, this did not work. Because for so many reasons, probably many that I can't ever speak of, but I think this is the kind of lesson that that we will need as souls if we are believing that I just have to think positive or I just have to do fill in the blank thing and then I get to order off the menu from the universe precisely what I want.
Yeah, totally. And it makes so much sense that this kind of thinking is coming out of the times that we're living in right now. Yeah, that's very true. Do you maybe want to tell us a little bit more about when you knew that herbalism would be your path? Because, I know you've also done body work, you've been a massage therapist, and you've also done a lot of art and creative projects. So with that experience in mind, when did you know this is what you wanted to do?
Well, it's always unfolding. I think I see it more like a braid of, multiple strands than a fierce monogamy with herbal medicine. It's more like a braid. Part of the call to herbal medicine had to do with being very sick and unable to access conventional healthcare in the U.S. Before the healthcare laws changed back in 2009 or whenever that happened, and then having always been drawn to the plants, but because it was such an outsider thing, and because we always had like books on, like natural remedies in my house, but it was sort of like, and my mom is a gardener. My mom's a plant person, but she's also just very like, clearly stakes her faith in the scientific tradition, which is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. And so I think it was really that crisis that I had that finally made me say, you know what? I give up. Like I want this. I'm going to follow it no matter how crazy it seems. And then kind of continuing on down the path and the how good the learning felt, how good I felt when I had the experience of being at my first, herbal seminar and getting sick with a sinus infection. And there's, usnea lichen all over the ground, like just the medicine exactly that I need is just right there. The power of that experience for someone who had been unable to access care was very, very impressive. And then as I continued, one of the things that was difficult for me when I was doing most of my healing work as a body worker was that it could feel like my body was working so hard to hold and contain what was present in the room for this other person, and then also having to work so hard because even if someone could come once a week, which is a best case scenario usually, even if they could access once a week sessions, there's so many more hours that their body isn't getting support. and the herbs can be right with you all the time. It's much easier to get consistent support to help shift. So it feels like a relief as someone doing healing work to have some buddies to call on who can be right there with the person, with them. And it doesn't have to all run through my body.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I did a massage therapy training too, and I absolutely loved it, but I never worked as a therapist because, for the same reason. I think human interaction, especially in real life, can be quite draining for me as an introvert. And so the idea of working in a studio where people would just come in and out and that was a bit overwhelming. But I cannot wait to go deeper into herbalism myself, and what you're saying really speaks to me. I love plants so much, and I think there's also this component of care and encouraging people to experiment with something that they can really hold and develop themselves. I think that's been the greatest healing for me, to be able, with very limited means, in my tiny kitchen, to make my own overnight nettle tea, for example.
Yes.
Absolutely loved it, and it really heals that relationship with trusting that care and nurturing is available as well, doesn't it? Because what you just said about, the trouble with the healthcare, and I think you said you had experienced not being able to access care. There was something really deep inside me going that's so, I cannot believe that we are living in a world where some people cannot access the most basic care right now. It's just heartbreaking, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, yes, and it is, and the coda to that story is, with the political changes happening here in the U.S., the most beautiful feeling was, as some of the immediate terror post-election subsided for me, which it's I have come to a much greater appreciation of the inherent balance between the right and left wing thinking, and how vital actually it is, all of these voices. So I'm not trying to cast everyone on the right wing aside, and there's something very different about this recent election here in the U.S. and as all of this rhetoric about tearing down these very healthcare protections that changed this for me and for so many others, and when my fear and anger and strong emotions subsided, what happened was I remembered. I thought, oh, this is what I trained for. This is the moment that all of, for me and for all of the other people who are doing this work, who've never been able to take insurance anyway, who are on the front lines, and who will welcome everyone. Most people who do the kind of work that I do have some form of sliding scale consideration. It is a balance to work with that, but most of us have some way of doing that, and it's oh well, I mean, I don't love that this is where we are, but I actually have a role here, and I'm prepared, and having that orientation toward a political challenge is so helpful. That is really an antidote to that feeling of powerlessness.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also there's so much to learn for us as humans, and especially as white people, in building a relationship with plants, because maybe that's just my experience because I'm such an introvert, but I felt as I started working with plants that it felt almost like a safer relationship to experiment with than with humans, if that makes sense. Because, I started asking these questions what can I give back to the plant or to the environment? Why do we feel the way we feel about weeds? I think that's such a big question for me as a queer as well. Why do we project so much aggression on these plants who are really just trying to grow. And why are we discarding their bodies rather than when we could really be eating them? And so one of the things that's really blowing my mind the most is that we have so many really fancy health foods right now, like chia seeds or like goji berries, who are being flown like around the world at tremendous cost for the environment and for us. And you know, we don't really know under what kind of labor conditions they are being produced. And actually, we could really just harvest the nettles and dry them.
Yes.
And so that was just kind of like a gateway for me to access activism and my political thinking in a different way, because I think it's so easy to feel helpless. And if you're a part of activist communities, at least for me, it can sometimes feel a bit overwhelming to be around that much anger, because anger is really important and I treasure it so much, but I think it can be really hard to transform it into an emotion or an action that is more fruitful and more maybe sustainable in the long term. And you know, that's really not to say that I think anger, especially right now, so has its place, but how are we going to work with that? And I think so working with plants at home, like in my own time, really gave me so much more insight and so much more sustenance. I feel like I'm in this for my life now, you know, like the values I've always had as a politically conscious person, I now believe that I get to live them for the rest of my life. And I think that plants have had such an important role in that.
Yes. Well, and, you know, part of what I hear I think in what you're describing is this, this role that the plants can play for us, as teachers who awaken metaphor within us. So there is a whole story behind why there's a connection for you between queerness and weeds.
Yeah.
And I have heard other people who have identities that have been marginalized to some degree, or that seeing themselves as outsiders, identifying with weeds in a similar way, and whatever it is, like whatever the plant is that calls us like that awakens that metaphor, is part of what I think it does that's different than a human being, is that the plant is speaking to you in a way that leaves you so much space to associate and to call forward your own knowing. When people teach us, they tend to teach us much more explicitly. So I think that is a big part of the healing, even for people who are not working with the plants quite so directly and ingesting them or making medicine.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite special plant that you feel like is part of your everyday life, or that you always come back to?
It changes for me. But if I had to have one favorite best friend, it would be Lobelia inflata. I just love Lobelia so much. I think that partly there's a whole fascinating history of Lobelia in kind of American medicine. There's a gentleman named Samuel Thompson who basically had his entire practice was based on like Lobelia and cayenne, and like that was it, and that was his materia medica, and that's what he did. And it's a very strange and interesting guy. And of course, there are a lot of indigenous use of Lobelia, but to me, I love Lobelia because first of all, she's a poison, as we were sort of talking about this poison class. So, there's a way that when I give Lobelia to people, I don't feel any fear anymore with myself, but there's a way that I know that if people go on, the internet, they're going to see like, this plant is toxic, and, they're going to see all that stuff, and don't take this plant, and this sort of thing. But when I can tell them, okay, here's what she does, and here's the experience is like, and here's how to slowly titrate your dose so that you feel something happen. And if you go beyond what you need to have happen, you might feel a little nauseous, but you know, you're not going to get sick and die. Like, the worst thing that will happen is that your body's going to say too much and you're going to throw up. And in fact, there was a time when people would do that quite intentionally for a healing effect. Yeah. So, I think there's both the incredible effect on the central nervous system that she has, that I think is so important for trauma, for muscular armoring, for anxiety and, grief stuck in the lungs. And the fact that she was called the thinking plant, because the experience of working with lobelia can feel that the plant is going to wherever in the body you need her to be. Wow. Which happens, my opinion is that happens because she's working deeply with the central nervous system. And so whatever your attention was telling you is bothering you will release, and you'll feel it specifically there, though the effects are actually systemic. So, for all of these reasons, and then the fact that you have to have a little bit of courage as a modern person to receive this medicine. You have to have just enough courage and enough trust to be willing to dare to take a toxic plant,
Yes.
Yeah.
I think hearing you speak, I also feel like I want to mention that I love so much how plants are facilitating us in really understanding our own needs in a deeper way, and then also finding the language to express them and trusting ourselves in making these choices for our health. And yeah, like you said, especially if you start making your own medicine, I think that the intention itself is so powerful. When I started making my first tinctures, I really had no idea what I was doing, to be honest. And the framework that I kind of set for myself was, I'm only going to work with plants that are safe to ingest, because that, and I actually now feel like you, there's so much value in poisonous, in air quotes, plants. But just as a beginning, I thought that would be like a good boundary for me. And my experience was just working with plants intuitively and making things up as I went along was just as valuable as having herbal consultations. And again, I think that's not a binary at all. I think there's so much beauty in working with someone who really knows what they're doing, and they know the plant constituents, and and they know how it can maybe possibly counteract other medicine that you're taking. But at the same time, it was so cool to just give it a try and to go to the Linnea's Yard Shop, which is, my herbal shop in my area here, where they have behind the counters like a whole wall of dried herbs. And it feels to me like a candy shop now.
Yes.
I would just go with my empty glass jars and be like, that looks really beautiful, or that plant speaks to me. And yeah, I think there's so much healing in that as well. Another thing that I'm just like sharing the plant love. Another thing that I really love in herbal communities and speaking to you is, it feels like people who love plants have an experience of being human and being in relationship with other humans that really speaks to me. And so what I mean practically, for example, is that I think a lot of people that have come to work with plants have an experience or an understanding of trauma that is really inclusive, and that kind of on many levels have understood that trauma is part of almost every person's life. And it feels a bit big to say every person's, about, I do really feel that we are living through times that are traumatic on our body and our nervous system and our mind in a way. And an example that comes to mind is where that I would understand like almost as a little gateway or an initiation to me was 1.5 years ago I had breast reduction surgery, which I had wanted for a really long time. I was developing really big boobs quite early when I was 10 or 11, and it just got me so much unwanted attention, and I attracted people, that were just really focused on them, and it felt really sexualized and objectified for a long time. And I think as an adult, that was it was easier to process, but I think as a young teenager, when you're just forming an identity, it was really difficult to have the resources and the understanding of, what that meant and how I could have boundaries around that. So anyway, it has been a wish for a long time. I really wanted that surgery, and tried to get it on my health insurance, which didn't work, and then I saved up. And I did it in Prague because that's in Eastern Europe, it's a lot cheaper, and that was how I was able to afford it. And the surgery went okay, but I developed really intense surgical site infections on both sides. So I'm going to show you on Skype now, but listeners can't see. So there were really big gaping holes in my scars where the two lines that were sewn together kind of crossed. And yeah, that felt really scary and traumatic because it felt like my body was falling apart, and I loved these new boobs so much. They were so light, and I thought, oh my God, I might not be needing a bra anymore. And in a way, I was ecstatic, but also really scared because it would just not leave. And I think I had them in total for about 2.5 months, and I had to have 4 rounds of antibiotics. And I really think that the antibiotics were necessary because the infection spread so fast. And yeah, I don't think, I really see the value in that treatment, but at the same time, back then, I didn't feel empowered to really research what that meant for my body. I didn't know much about how I might need to kind of restore my gut health, for example, after having these treatments. And so, yeah, and after so at the end of the 4th round of the antibiotic treatment, it still wasn't subsiding. It was still exactly the same as in the beginning. And so I got really frustrated and worried, and I thought, I've tried everything I know to try. What am I going to do next? And I was in Portugal living on a little mountain at the time, and I contacted a local herbalist and said, this is what's happened, and I had these 4 rounds of antibiotics, and I'm just not sure what to do anymore. And she talked to me for about an hour on Skype, and we talked about my relationship to my body, what that surgery meant to me, how much I loved now not wearing a bra anymore, how it had felt like to be sexualized in that way at a very young age. And at the end of the call, she said, I think, Sarah, this is not about the scars or the infection. I think there's just more for you to explore there. And I kind of surrendered into that, had a really big cry, and spent the next week after that really just journaling about these early experiences and about what that meant for me, and it healed. And I stopped the antibiotics and I healed then. And, I think there's many things that played into the healing in the end and definitely I think the antibiotics had a big, role in that. And sometimes the effect shows up a little bit later, and that might have been the case. But I just think she recommended a couple of herbs for me, and I went to get them, and I just felt again, finally I felt again like there was something that I could do for myself, and someone had really listened to me and had acknowledged my pain and my trauma, and that was so powerful. And I think that was for me a moment where it's like, yeah, that's what I want to
do. Yes. I think I think that there are different kinds of plant people. I know people who there's like medicine makers, and which is not me. I mean, I can passively make some medicines, but that's not my gift. So there are different versions of this, but I think one of the pieces, what I hear in your experience with this other herbalist and the way that I practice, which I think partly for me is that thread relating to art and theater and storytelling, is that story medicine is part of the herbal tradition too, and it's not immediately apparent exactly what the connection is between the plant, the way the plants call to us, and the story piece, except maybe there's something in that fact that plants teach us through metaphor and direct experience, and then maybe the fact that the way that a lot of this knowledge would have been preserved through generations would have had to do with stories that ran on seasonal cycles, and that included the plants and information about their use and how to identify them, and that we remember things much. Storytelling is a technology for memory and for awakening things within ourselves. So I think this this piece about the story, I think, is very important for. And actually, there's a movement within conventional medicine. The idea of narrative medicine is present. Something that physicians talk about now. So it's very, it's so. I don't know exactly where I'm going with that, but that's what I hear.
Yes, that makes total sense. Yeah. I always love to kind of give listeners something practical that they can take from an episode. And I was wondering what, there's several questions in this, but just feel free to answer whichever you feel you most want to talk about. So one would be, what do you wish everyone knew about herbalism? And then the other would be, what do you advise someone who's kind of just starting out on that path, who's maybe thinking about working with a herbalist and who's just kind of feeling into what the options are and what they can do?
Well, I think what I wish everyone knew is that, like we say about feminism, there's not just feminism, there are feminisms. Mm-hmm. That there's not just herbalism, there are herbalisms. Mm-hmm. And so whatever your, there's a way to engage with this tradition that will nourish you. Mm. And, for someone like my mom, who really is not interested in using herbal medicine as a primary healing strategy for named, diagnoses, that doesn't stop her from getting so much from being in the garden and from going to an herb shop where it's mostly culinary and sort of, home decor and smelling that, and engaging that way. Or for someone who is very rational and scientific minded, there is an absolute explosion of research that is falling right within that, double-blind, placebo-controlled, extract out the quote-unquote active constituent and test the crap out of it. Like, there's a lot of that going on. So you can learn and engage there. There's, and then there are so many traditions, the beautiful thing about being alive at this troubled time in history and having the privilege of being, somebody who has access to technology, as you have if you're listening to this show, is that you can learn from so many of the world's traditions, regardless of who you are or where you were born. For most of recorded history, I would not have been allowed to learn any of these traditions for the simple fact of being born a woman. Yeah. Now, then you add to that the fact of, the traditions that have been the most thoroughly preserved and passed down are outside of the Western tradition and, in languages that I don't speak, from communities of which I was not born into. Mm-hmm. And yet my experience in China was one of absolute welcome and sharing and, generosity, that if you are willing, regardless of, your own racial and ethnic and community background, if you show up with humility and a desire to learn and practice, my experience has been so far universally that people will open their tradition generously to anyone who wants to learn. And that is a kind of wealth that it just is staggering to think about. So I think I would like people to know that there's a way in, and just to follow their own curiosity and follow your own interest. And then as far as getting started, well, certainly if you'd like to come to my YouTube channel and watch my sort of Foundations of Herbal Medicine series, or listen to that, as long, we're still having technical problems, so it might just be listening for a while, but you're a podcast person, so you won't mind.
No, yes.
So this is an option, but I think it really is just that, just following that small voice within you, that whatever it is that it's saying, like, oh, that's cool, or like, oh, check that out, or walking along and just noticing a plant and like, oh, I wonder, what is that plant? Or like, can I look it up, or, get a field guide and start finding the names. And, half of the plants that you see are going to be edible or medicinal. You're going to go on a mushroom hunt. I mean, like, talk about amazing experiences. So whatever, just follow your own curiosity and interest, and don't feel that there's one prescribed way to engage with this, or that there's one tradition, or that there's one right way. There's not. There's so many ways, and your own heart will lead you to the one that's right for you. And if you are working with a diagnosis or an undiagnosed condition that is more serious than something that in the conventional medicine world you'd like run to the drugstore and get just an over-the-counter thing, if that's your situation, I strongly recommend that you have a guide. And that could be a primary care physician that you trust, and then you do your herbal exploration and run things by them. That could be having an herbalist or acupuncturist. But it's so important to get your hands in the medicine and to do it yourself, and to have that direct connection. And when you are really underneath something, even for me, I have colleagues that I consult with, because you cannot see yourself from the outside. You want to be able to stay in the subjective experience. You don't want to be trying to be your own practitioner. So I think I liked what you said about, Sarah, about when you first started, you had some boundaries, that one boundary was like, I'm going to work with stuff that I know I can't overdose on, I think another boundary that is really helpful that I would offer to people is, I'm not going to go it alone if I really need help. I'm not going to do that to myself.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think there's so much learning in just the process of acknowledging the need, being able to express it, and then finding the right person, maybe with some intuition in that choice as well, that will be able to meet that need. Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
You are offering so many things, and I would really love to hear a little bit more about that. So one thing, as a web designer, interestingly, that I noticed, you have a relatively new website, I think.
Yes.
It's really beautiful. I love the colors. I mean, that's just the designer speaking. I think it's really beautiful. And I also love your approach and how you're engaging with people, because I had... sometimes what I do just out of, professional interest is kind of screen a website and see where the priorities are, where people are being led, how we're working with attention. And I noticed that you don't have very prominent social media icons. And you also spoke in one of your latest newsletters about kind of missing the way we were on Facebook a few years ago. And I totally agree with that. I feel like it's become so hectic. And as a small business owner, frankly, also just too expensive to have the exposure that we used to have just by sharing our content, because we now just have to boost everything, and also it just feels like such a loud environment, and it feels like that it sometimes feels like I would need to compromise my integrity and my values in order to stand out in that environment. And that's really it's something I'm thinking about a lot right now. And I think this podcast is so close to my heart, because it feels like so much more personal, and there's so much beauty. Like we said before we went in this call, there's something so great about an audio transmission of information, I think. So can you maybe tell us a little bit more about how you feel about that, and what made you start the video series, maybe what people can learn from that, how they can connect with you, and what you're offering as a service?
Yeah, so thank you so much for your kind words about the website. My designer's name is Lori Barron from comesayhello.com, and it was a long journey to have this website ready, because I was changing so much. She was so patient with me. And, the feeling that I had is that, Psyche and Soma is a world that exists outside of me. My practice and I are not exactly the same. And so I wanted the website to be like a place, a home for that being, of the work, and that it's like a little grove where we can come and meet each other. And Facebook is not a place, like, the spirit of my practice will like run away from Facebook, and I want to run away from Facebook too myself. So it's not a great place for us anymore to meet. And so the site, my hope is I have quite a few free resources there. I like depth, and Psyche and Soma really likes depth. So, I know that not everybody is going to read my fairly long emails that I send, and all of my deep, and not everybody is going to come to this. I'm currently offering a free 3-month-long Foundations of Herbal Medicine teaching series on YouTube.
Which is so amazing. Can I just step that in for a moment? I know you're putting so much heart and soul into this, and I know, how much energy it can take to really step forward and get the technology right and share it and be with the reality that might not always be perfect. There's so much in that, and so thank you so much for doing that, because I know, as you do, I care so much about this knowledge and this tradition and this work, and I just wish that access for everyone, and I think you're making such a big contribution with that video series to that.
Oh, so thank you. Well, it's it is a challenge, and I think that there's a sense that I've had to go through, like you're saying, as a small business owner, I just had to say, I have to go all in for depth and meaning and connection and love, and it is not going to be for everybody, and that's okay, because there are other teachers who are snappy and like witty, like there are other people who are going to carry that part, and I don't have to do it all myself. I just have to do the part that's given to me to do. So yeah, and then the way that I work, most of what I do is one-on-one herbal consulting. And the way that I work is that there's a very clear doorway of how we begin. And that is with an individual tongue reading. And that's all the information about that is on my site. And what I've learned over the years is that it's really helpful, because by the time someone is willing to send a total stranger on the internet a picture of their tongue, by the time someone is ready to do that, they're ready for healing. Yeah. Like it's not an easy thing to do. It's like a really intimate and kind of scary thing to do. But and I didn't intend it this way, but by the time people are ready to do that, they're really, there's an initiation in it, I think, like sending me their tongue photo. And then that gives us a chance to meet one another, for me to understand what's going on with someone's body, how they're caring for themselves. Do they have enough, support from other healthcare providers? Is what I do the right thing that is going to help them get ethics? We're going to cover this in the Foundation series, but my great passion is for ethical practice within complementary medicine. I think, unfortunately, it is all too often something that is not emphasized enough in the programs where people are learning, and because very real scarcity, as well as a mindset relating to scarcity, can exist for those of us who work on the margin in some way. That's actually something that can really corrupt us and our practice. And so the ethical guidelines are very important to me. So when I'm meeting with someone, you cannot. Oh, I'm so sorry about that.
Don't worry.
Darned thing. I'm not used to being in a place where there's a landline. There's a landline here. So, when I meet with someone, I will only take that person on as a client if I feel that there is at least, a 70% chance that we're going to make a significant amount of progress. And I always say, here's what I think the minimum effective dose of herbal therapy is going to be. So, we need to work together for at least 6 weeks and this many sessions. And that's what we have to commit to, because if we just commit to 2 sessions, we're not going to be able to get there. This is what we need. And then when we get to that point 6 weeks from now, if it's not going well and you're not getting better, then you have to move on to the next step. So I think having all of those boundaries and having that clear path is really important. So even if I'm not the person that you resonate with, I think that it's really important, whether we're talking about conventional medicine, herbal medicine, acupuncture, ask your providers. I know you can't promise me, I know there's always individual variation, but based on your best estimate, in your clinical experience, about how long do you think it's going to take for me to start seeing improvement? And at what point would we say that this treatment isn't effective and I need to try something different? Put those boundaries in for yourself.
That sounds really great. And where can people find you if they want to find out more?
Yeah, so you can come to psycheandsoma.com. If that sounds frightening to try to spell, you can just Google me, Melanie St. The last name is St.Ours. And you'll find Psyche and Soma that way. And certainly come on over to YouTube. My channel is easy to find if you just Google Melanie St. And come and hang out with us for this next month.
I will definitely be there as well, and I cannot wait for other episodes. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. This was really beautiful, and I just have such a strong feeling that we've shared really cool stuff. I loved your thoughts. I loved hearing about your experiences, and I really hope that we have inspired some people to try herbalism as well. And I think just, thinking about the now and the future, it's so magical that we're doing this now, we're in this together, but there will be people in the future engaging with this.
Yes,
with past us.
Right now, if you're listening.
It's quite cool, isn't it? So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And now a final little note from me. If you enjoyed my podcast, I would really, really appreciate a review on iTunes. For new podcasts, this is a really important way to make sure that we're being found and to reach more people. So thank you so much for writing a review. And a reminder that if you're into plants and magic and ritual, you can sign up for my free ritual course on daydreamingwolves.com. Bye!